Hello, family. Good to see you this morning. Shout out to Royston joining us. Good. In the Bible, we see that blessings are powerful, and so let me start by blessing you as we get going today. I bless you now in the name of Jesus that you would know Jesus more wonderfully this morning. May God bless you and protect you. May He smile upon you and be gracious to you. May He show you His favor and give you His peace. In the name of Jesus, may it be. All right. Welcome, everybody. If you are new here or are visiting, we are doing a quick overview of the entirety of the Bible. And we're using timelines, and we're using maps, and we're using archaeology, and we're having a hoot. At least I am. In this series. My hope coming out of this time is that you would have a good sense of how things fit together, how things flow together, and so you can kind of, when you're reading on your own, see and understand maybe where this fits in the whole story. Today, though, we come to the most complicated bit in all of the Bible. This is the bit where most people become so lost and confused that they just throw up their hands and they're like, I give up, I can't understand this, I don't know what's happening or how this all fits together. So, good news, everybody. Although it may look complicated, it has a simple and profound message, a powerful message for us today, and I think today we'll start putting it together in a little bit more clear way. Here's the basic timeline of what we've been looking at thus far in our study. So I want to be remembering that Abraham is at the 2000 BC mark. He is very old, maybe only 7, 8, 9 years left in his life. Abraham's old, but he's alive. So is Isaac, so is Jacob. They're all alive at the 2000 mark. Moses is alive at the 1500 mark, and he's young. He's about 30 at that point, but he's alive. Last week we talked about the one kingdom era with David as the middle, and David is king at the 1000 BC mark. When we were talking about this era of one kingdom, there was three main kings during this time: King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. And this is pretty much the golden era of the nation. It's in this time, as with all nations, where the poetry and the arts are thriving. And so it's during this era where many of the Psalms are being written. Many of the Proverbs are being written at this time. The book of Ecclesiastes is being written at this time. The book of Song of Solomon is written at this time. It's this golden age. But then, as we talked about last week, at the end of King Solomon's reign, the third of these kings, he does something very evil. And he starts building demon idol temples to other gods in order to keep his foreign wives happy. And God is not okay with that. He is not happy with this, not just worshiping God alone. He's very opposed to these other demon gods. And so, as a result, after Solomon dies, the kingdom splits and the golden age of the nation crumbles. Now, that's the bit we're going to be looking at today. Starting in 930 BC and going to about 700 BC. So that's the timeline. It's a bit, if you're trying to think it through, you've got Moses and Joshua and then the Judges, right? This very divided era. And then you've got the golden age, King David, Saul, David, and Solomon. And then you've got another era kind of like the Judges, where it's not going well and it's divided. Before we dive into the story, though, let me set the stage for this era because it's so quickly confusing. Crooksey has been showing us he's been making these very beautiful timelines, whereas I had Picasso draw out his version of this next era, and it's not anything as beautiful, but still, Picasso, way to go. What makes this era in the Bible so complicated, it has four things happening at the same time that are very helpful to know. We're most familiar with the fact that it's a divided kingdom. So you've got a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And so on this timeline, the bottom line here is the southern kingdom. And you'll see the kings circled in blue. Those are the ones where God's assessment is that they did good. All the other kings have an assessment of they were evil in the sight of the Lord. None of the northern kings, which is the line just above that, have any good godly references there. So you've got the southern kingdom, and it'll continue past this bit of the timeline. But you've got the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. You're going to read about these stories in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and other books like Isaiah has a lot of this era in it. And so it's very easy, though, to get lost because of all the different things happening. So we call this era the divided kingdom. The third line from the bottom has in purple where some of those books that we call prophets are being written. And what the timeline. Now, at the end of the Old Testament, you have all these books that are usually pretty short that are out of chronological order. And so very often, like, where do they fit? Well, none of them take place before this era. And they're now, as you get about 2/3 of the way through this era, they're starting now to show up, and they will continue from this point to the end of the Old Testament era, the last being Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament. So from here on. So you can see that. You can also see in blue on that line, you can see Elijah and Elisha, those famous prophets. They don't have books named after them, but just putting them on the timeline because they're pretty significant people in this era. And then on the top line, during all the years of the stories in 1 Kings and 2 Kings and 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles, there's this other major thing taking place in the world. The world's first superpower is emerging. And you can see that Assyria has been around since the days of Genesis, and it's been decently strong throughout the years, but it's been equally as strong as, say, Egypt and Babylon and Persia. And Assyria. They've been about the same strong, so they keep each other in check. But in this era, something extraordinary happens with Assyria, and they become invincible. They become the world's most powerful nation. There's never been a nation before Assyria as powerful. Now, I'm saying the word invincible, and some of you Bible scholars are like, oh, come on, Brian. We know that Babylon is going to overthrow Assyria, and it's hardly going to be a comment in the Bible. Okay. The only reason Babylon is able to take over Assyria is because in the last years of Assyria, the two princes start a massive civil war where they take half of the invincible army and they battle it against the other half of the invincible army, and they just keep bashing and destroying each other for years until they get so weakened that the combined armies of all the rest of the civilized world at that time, the Medes, the Persians, the Babylonians, they converge at the same time. In fact, they're racing to Nineveh to try and be the victor, but they're converging at the same time in order to overthrow Assyria. Assyria was invincible, and it took it destroying itself plus all the combined might to overthrow it. It's just incredible. We'll talk more about that someday, hopefully, because I'm a big fan of that aspect. But for now, we're going to look at the story in the Bible. So Assyria is growing in the background, and we're going to just clock it. It will start making its appearance in the Bible during this era. So we're going to put up the multiverse again. We've got the timeline there. Oh, no, I want to show you a map. Can you show me the map? Yes, there we go. For those of you who are like, where is Assyria? Red circle. And they are growing in that bit, and then you've got the blue area, the blue circle area where the kingdoms of Israel and Judah are taking place. So Assyria is growing in the distance. Okay, so the multiverse again. So we're talking about the story, and we're going to look at you're going to see these yellow boxes as we're tracking through it. I'm not going to talk about all the eras or all the kings, but the bits that I'm going to be talking about are in these yellow boxes. And the first one is at the beginning, because after King Solomon dies, several things get established right away that impact the whole era. First of all, King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was being crowned king. And as he's being crowned king, the nation comes to him and says, we have two requests. One, your father treated us harshly, and we want you to back off a little bit, a lot. And secondly, he taxed us heavily, and we want you to reduce our taxes. So, the son of the wise King Solomon, ironic, makes this foolish decision. And he pulls together the advisors of his father's generation, the older generation, and they give him wise counsel. Letting that hang out there. Going to the previous dinner, yay, old generation, right? They give him wise counsel. But then he goes to his friends, his buddies, his peers, his generation, and they give him a different answer. The wise generation says, give them what they want now and they'll serve you forever. His friends are like, be strong, be a man, be tough. Like as they egg each other on, and it was bad. And this is what took place in 1 Kings chapter 12. So the king paid no attention to the people. This turn of events was the will of the Lord, for it fulfilled the Lord's message to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh. Oh, man. Guys, this might be the last time I can read from this Bible without glasses on. Yikes. When all Israel realized that the king had refused to listen to them, they responded, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Back to your homes, O Israel. Look out for your own house, O David." So the people of Israel returned home, but Rehoboam continued to rule over the Israelites who lived in the towns of Judah. Okay, so now there's two kingdoms. Here's a map. So you can see on the map, you've got Judah to the south in green, and you've got the northern kingdom in purple. Now, if you remember the Solomon kingdom, it was so vast. The devastation of this moment, they lost all of the empire influence. It just crumbled instantly. And you have two divisions, two groups now in this small area. It's just so rapid what took place with one foolish decision. And I want you to see on this map is that Israel, the northern kingdom, is much bigger and has way better land. In fact, this map doesn't do it justice because you're looking at Judah down in the south and you're like, that doesn't look that bad. It looks pretty big. But there's a little river there, which isn't hardly there in real life except for in the rainy season, which is like never. That little river by Beersheba, everything south of that is nearly uninhabitable. It's just wilderness. It's just wilderness. So Judah is so small, and it's been hemmed in. It's by the Philistines on the side, and so it's up in the hill country. It's a non-player on the world stage because it doesn't have access to any of the main roads. It's just up in the hill country. It's so humiliated. The north is better at growing food. It controls parts of the roads for the trade routes and the taxation. It is such a humiliating loss that takes place, and we kind of miss that while reading the Bible. Because we're focused on the spiritual realities in the Bible more than the political realities. And we're seeing that they do generally follow God more frequently than the northern kingdom does. And we're tracking the line of kings leading to King Jesus. So it gets more emphasis, and yet what has happened is devastating. These countries are not equal. The northern kingdom is much bigger, much stronger, much wealthier, much more people, much better land. It's not even close. They even took the name. We're going to be Israel. Come up with your own name. We're going to be Israel. Okay, so when the northern kingdom broke away at this moment, Jeroboam was made king of the northern kingdom, Rehoboam on the south. You can see why it's confusing, these names, right? Rehoboam on the south, Jeroboam on the north. So when the Jeroboam becomes king in the north, he starts off and he makes one decision at the beginning of his reign, which it's going to be the doom of the northern kingdom from day one. It just sets it up to fail. And this is what he does in the beginning, in 1 Kings chapter 12, starting in verse 26. It says, Jeroboam thought to himself, unless I am careful, the kingdom will return to the dynasty of David. When these people go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord, they will again give their allegiance to King Rehoboam of Judah. They will kill me and make him their king instead. I'm going to just pause. I'm going to keep reading in a moment. But strategically, what Jeroboam's doing here, strategically, it's brilliant. If God is not real. It's brilliant. But since God is real, it's strategically devastating. And I just think, how many times do we make decisions based on what seems, human speaking, like strategic? Like, for instance, I see students coming up to exam seasons, and they're like, okay, instead of going to church and worship God, who can help me and hears prayers and all that, I'm going to stay home and study. Strategically makes sense. Another 90 minutes. If God's not real. But if God is real, like, worship God, honor God first, and then go from there. Or people in stress seasons at work. Oh man, I just need to sleep in this morning. I just need some down. I just need to get caught up on some things. I'm going to pass. I just need a break. Okay, strategically that might make sense if God's not real. But if God is real, prioritize. Okay, just keeping reading. Okay, there we go. So, on the advice of his counselors, the king made 2 gold calves. Not one like they had at Mount Sinai, 2. 2 gold calves. Waiting for my eyes to adjust. He said to the people, it is too much trouble for you to worship in Jerusalem. Look, Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of Egypt. He placed these calf idols in Bethel and in Dan at either end of his kingdom. This became a great sin, for the people worshipped the idols, traveling as far north as Dan to worship the one there. Here's a picture of the area in Dan in the north where this worship center is. You can see like the metal altar size and area made there, kind of on the top left bit of that area. Again, if you want God to be against you, do this, right? But that's not going to be our story. And I just encourage you over and again, flee every other spiritual anything. I tried to make this point last week. Flee every other spiritual anything. Have nothing to do with it. God is so fiercely angered and repulsed by those who mix spiritual things. The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Yeah. Anyways, back to our timeline here. So that was the first era. The second era that I want to highlight in the yellow box here, I want to cheat forward a little bit. So this is the King Ahab era. But just before King Ahab is his father, King Omri. And I better highlight, like, historically speaking, Omri is probably the greatest, humanly speaking, king of the northern kingdom. He makes it its strongest. He makes it its best. He makes it, he expands. He builds the capital city of Samaria, an amazing place. So historically, he's very significant. But the Bible places a lot more emphasis on King Ahab and his wife Jezebel because spiritually, they just devastate the nation. Not only do they worship the golden calves in the north and south, they bring in the worship of Baal and Asherah to such an elevated position in the nation, and they start systematically, Jezebel specifically, killing all of God's prophets, trying to wipe out the testimony about God in their nation. This evil is just wild, and it's in that context where you see the story of Elijah showing up, and Elijah calling together all the prophets of Baal, hundreds of them, on top of Baal's mountain. And they gather on top of Baal's mountain, and their task is whoever's God answers with fire to light their sacrifices, that's the God who's real. And so Baal's prophets call out, and nothing happens. Elisha prays once, fire falls from the sky, and the nation declares, maybe for the only time in all of its story, from the days of Jeroboam all the way to the end, Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God. It's such a moment. And yet that revival doesn't catch, probably because Elijah ran away. Just the next day, he's on the run, fleeing the nation. But again, it's a powerful moment right there. The next timeline in highlight, I've highlighted Jehu. Now, why am I highlighting him? Well, I could have highlighted him because he's probably one of the bright spots of the kings. He does continue to worship the golden cows of the north and south, and so God does not give him that divine thumbs up verdict. But he starts off his reign being anointed by a prophet, and you can see him intentionally doing everything that God tells him to do. It's pretty amazing. But that's not why I'm highlighting him. I'm highlighting him because of this picture. So this picture is incredible. Every time I'm in the British Museum, I go and find this black obelisk, and it was discovered in Nineveh, in the ancient Assyrian area. And what you have on this obelisk is lots of reliefs and pictures of different kings. And this is King Jehu, kneeling down before the king of Assyria, bringing his tribute. Now, what's so significant about this historically, this is the only contemporary picture of an Israelite king, something that was made in that generation. You're like, that's what they looked like. That's what they dressed like. You can see, that's what his beard is like. Okay, they wear like Smurf hats or something. I don't know, but that's the only, I find that incredible just to see, in that generation, this is being carved and made by people who knew and saw and were there. Now, although Assyria hasn't yet been mentioned in the Bible, that superpower threat is growing in the background, and it's influencing the kings in this era. Anyways, Jehu here, he doesn't lead the people out of their idolatry, and so the nation continues in sinning as the timeline continues. I suppose the last era that we're going to highlight in this season is the end there. Now, you can notice some years after Jehu, you get those minor prophet books are starting. So you're like Jonah. You know what Jonah is about? Jonah is about God calling a prophet to the capital city of Assyria to go and tell them that in 40 days the city is going to be destroyed or overturned. And yet, what happens with Assyria and the capital of Assyria? The prophet of God speaks, and the nation repents. The nation of Israel will not respond to the prophets that way. But Assyria, the capital of Assyria, is going to repent, and they're going to be spared. Israel will never repent, and they will not be spared, giving that away. Anyway, so Jonah is there. You can see at the top, the names in red are the Assyrian kings that show up in the Bible, that are mentioned in the Bible. You've got Tiglath-Pileser, and he's radically expanding the Assyrian Empire. It's growing ginormously, if that's even a word, during his reign. And he, in the Bible, comes and he attacks and captures some of the northern kingdom, like part of the Galilee gets taken away during his reign. Ultimately, Shalmaneser, the fifth, he attacks the kingdom of the north, and he lays siege to Samaria, the capital city. It seems like he doesn't finish that siege, but he starts the siege, and the one who follows him, Sargon II, ends up finishing the job, capturing Samaria, and then exporting all of the people from the northern kingdom, except for a tiniest of remnant, exporting them across the nation out to Assyria, Babylon, area of the Medes, and beyond. You can read about this in 2 Kings chapter 17. So in 722 BC, a date you all have memorized just like that, 722 BC, after only 208 years of existing as a nation, the bigger, stronger, wealthier northern kingdom called Israel was destroyed by Assyria, and the people are exported across the world, never to return. Why does this happen? Why does God allow this to happen? Well, the Bible tells us, and I'm just going to let the Bible speak for itself at this moment. Here's why it happened. It says, this disaster came upon the people of Israel because they worshiped other gods. They sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them safely out of Egypt 700 years before, and had rescued them from the power of Pharaoh 740 years before, the king of Egypt. They had followed the practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them, as well as the practices the kings of Israel had introduced. The people of Israel had also secretly done many things that were not pleasing to the Lord their God. They built pagan shrines for themselves in all their towns, from the smallest outpost to the largest walled city. They set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles at the top of every hill and under every green tree. They offered sacrifices on all the hilltops, just like the nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them. So, the people of Israel had done many evil things, arousing the Lord's anger. Yes, they worshiped idols, despite the Lord's specific and repeated warnings. Again and again, the Lord sent his prophets and seers to warn both Israel and Judah. Turn from all your evil ways. Obey my commands and decrees. The entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey and that I gave you through my servants, the prophets. But the Israelites would not listen. They were as stubborn as their ancestors who had refused to believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors, and they despised all his warnings. They worshiped worthless idols, so they became worthless themselves. They followed the example of the nations around them, disobeying the Lord's command not to imitate them. They rejected all the commands of the Lord, their God, and made 2 calves from metal. They set up an Asherah pole and worshiped Baal and all the forces of heaven. They even sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and practiced sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. Because the Lord was very angry with Israel, he swept them away from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. So in summary, God destroyed the nation, number one, because they worshiped other gods instead of the one who had been good to them in ages past. Again, the rescue of Egypt was 700 years previously, and yet God expected them to still worship and honor him for what he had done hundreds and hundreds of years before. Don't get caught up with this whole God, what have you done for me lately trap. Don't think that way. God, what have you done for me lately? Think, God, what have you done for me throughout the ages? Okay, wow. Wow. That's where we're supposed to simmer. So firstly, they were destroyed because they worship other gods. Secondly, they were destroyed because they'd been warned over and over again by godly people and the scriptures to stop sinning, but they wouldn't stop. They wouldn't stop. They would hear it, but they wouldn't stop. And friends, we're warned by this. Don't just come to church and ignore the call to live a godly life. Like, live a godly life. Lean in Stop sinning. Stop the compromising that's taking place behind closed doors or whatever, and live the life that God is calling you to live. Thirdly, they consulted fortune tellers. And don't even touch that stuff. Again, God hates that, witchcraft and all that. Well, they did all these things. They never repented until the end came, and the evil but the invincible nation of Assyria comes and destroys that northern kingdom forever. What about Judah, that southern kingdom? Well, in Judah, in the southern kingdom, the Assyrian invasion also came. And yet there was a godly king named Hezekiah. And Assyria came to attack the kingdom of Judah. It started destroying its border cities. You can see an example of this with Lachish down in the British Museum, a whole room showing the fall and the destruction of this mighty city of Lachish by the Assyrian army. But when Assyria came to attack Jerusalem, godly King Hezekiah prayed. He prayed. It's recorded in 2 Kings 19. It's recorded in Isaiah 37. He tore his clothes in humility and grief before the Lord. And he spread out on this piece of paper of the insults being written by the Assyrian commanders to God. And he put that in front of the Lord. And God made him a promise because he humbled himself and he came before him, that God would not allow Assyria to take Jerusalem. Now, friends, this is impossible. It would take a miracle for this to happen. It has never happened. It does not happen. No other city was ever spared, and yet a miracle is what happened, and we read this in 2 Kings 19. This is what the Bible said in explanation of why Jerusalem only was saved. It says, that night, the angel of the Lord went out to the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000. Okay, wow. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. When the surviving Assyrians woke up the next morning, they found corpses everywhere. It sounds like a fictional story. It sounds like a fairy tale. And yet we know that this is what happens because we have the same account by the Assyrians. I took this picture in the British Museum as well. This is Sennacherib's prison, the guy who was invading Judah. This prison contains with him all the records of the city after city after city that he conquered and he took over. At the bottom, at the end of it, which is the side that's on the right, just near the bottom, you can see that it stops a little bit near the end. But you see where the conquest story ends is at Jerusalem. And it says this near the end. It says, as for Hezekiah, the Judahite, who did not submit to my yoke, I shut him up like a caged bird in his royal city of Jerusalem. I built siege ramps against him, and whoever came out of the city gate, I made them suffer. No claim of taking the city. I had him surrounded like a bird in a cage. Unheard of historically. The Assyrians, their account of this event matches perfectly the Bible, that Jerusalem wasn't taken. Let me show you this on a map. So Assyria, green, right? You can see the sprawling area of Assyria. Look at the nations that they took. Egypt. They took all the cities in Egypt. You can see Persia, Susa. They took Persia, the Ecbantia, the capital of the Medes, Babylon there. There was nothing that they couldn't take, and yet you can see where Jerusalem is a little different color. This is not a Bible map, by the way. This is from I don't know what to call it, a pagan map? It's just a normal atlas, not a Christian atlas. But this map is showing like Jerusalem and Judah never fell. Why? Historians have no explanation why this country could take everything else, all the mighty nation empires around them, and not capture Jerusalem. The only explanation is what we see in the Bible, and we see the record of it, we didn't take it from the Assyrians. And you're like, how is that even possible? Well, that brings us to the simple and most powerful message of this era. Here's the message. Do not underestimate this incredible significance of choosing to walk with God faithfully. Saying no to sin and going to Him in prayer for help. God is really real. And He hears prayers. And He does impossible things for those who love Him and who walk in His ways and who call out to Him in prayer. History has proven this. Now, we're going to talk more about Hezekiah next week. Not everything goes well for this godly man. Not everything is easy for him. Actually, he has some pretty bad moments in his life. But in this significant moment, God steps into history in direct response to this guy's prayer, this godly king's prayer, and He stops what is unstoppable, globally speaking. Assyria cannot be stopped, and yet God sent an angel and stopped it. I keep thinking about what I said last week about Jerusalem, and I think it applies again this week when it comes to Jerusalem. You can be Jerusalem. That anomaly, uniquely helped and favored by God. For those of you who are choosing to follow Him and to walk in His way and not doing what everybody else is doing. If that's your life, well done. Keep going with that. God sees you who are following Him. He sees you who are saying no to sin. He sees you who are trying to walk in God's ways, and there's going to be rewards. It is not foolish to live your life all in for Jesus. This Bible stuff is real, and it means good stuff for us who believe. Here's the challenge for today. It's a prayer challenge inspired by King Hezekiah. The challenge is this. I challenge you to take your most impossible prayer request to God this week. Your most impossible one. Not your second most impossible one. Your most impossible prayer request to God this week. Write it down on a piece of paper and present it to Him in prayer, pleading for His intervention in what seems impossible to you. So you write it down, you slide it across the desk. Here you go, God. This request seems impossible to me, but I'm asking you to intervene in this situation. Please act. Please intervene in Jesus' name. Let's start right now. Why don't you close your eyes with me? What is your most impossible prayer request from your perspective? Just bring it to mind. What would you say is your hardest, your number one most unlikely prayer request to be answered? When you have that in your mind, then ask yourself, what do you believe about God? Can He do this? Can God actually do this? Remember, it's not about likeliness or percentages with God. Can He do it? What makes you think God is able to do it? What makes you think He's able to answer this prayer? Okay, then now ask Him. God, would you intervene in this situation, please? Because you can. Father, I ask you to hear and answer the prayers that are being prayed in this place. Why? Because I want the world to know that you can still do anything, that nothing is impossible with you. Your word says nothing's impossible. I know it. I believe it. And let our lives testify by what you do, that you still hear prayers and that you can do the impossible in our generation and even connected to our lives. Hear and act immediately in Jesus' name.